Right, stop what you're doing right now because this probably is going to be nothing like what you've seen before. Apple's iPhone versus Google's Android. 14 Pro Max versus 7 Pro. Which should you buy? But not all of that regurgitated drivel, nonsense, the specs and the design, we know all that already. But instead, all of the intricate details, the pros and cons that you can only truly know from daily use. And importantly, how each of these phones helps you interact with your daily lives and the other tech products you might own. Time to settle this debate once and for all, Team iPhone or Team Android. And I want to hear from you as well. Let me know in the comments your experience and which you choose. And thanks to Rhino Shield for sponsoring today's video. Just realised it looks quite spooky there with the green lighting, a little bit late for Halloween, but... Right, so I made a video a few weeks ago where I said I was chucking my SIM from the 14 Pro Max into the 7 Pro here, using the iPhone almost as a bit of a sidecar, daily driver going for the Pixel. Spare a thought for the new, no physical US SIM gang. Gone, but not forgotten. But all jokes aside, there are a lot of things I do prefer about the Pixel 7 Pro. But again, a fair few things that are inferior. Starting with software. Now, this can be very subjective, but objectively, I have a real niche one to start. Creating desktop shortcuts. They're just better on the iPhone. Sometimes not every website that you use has an app version, and often searching for it, typing in the link, etc. to go to it, just a bit of a faff. So you create a web shortcut, and it almost creates an app on your home screen. But there is a difference on each platform. On the iPhone, not only does it just look more like a standard app for a cleaner visual appearance, but from a functionality point of view, I find it tends to work better as well. More seamless and not like a mobile web link extension. More seamless, more like an actual app and not a mobile website shortcut. Whether this is a Chrome v Safari thing, I don't know, but often if I'm using a shortcut to a website that contains videos as an example, these videos just load and work as Windows much smoother, more reliable, less glitchy and more user-friendly. And in my experience, even saving things like images from Discord just appears easier and tends to work better. I will in a second touch on some of the software features I prefer on the Pixel, but staying with the iPhone for a second, what else is better on the 14 Pro Max? Well, for a start, social media apps as a whole. For some reason, they just feel more polished. Whether that's just simple things like scrolling just appears less laggy at times, or whether it's just things like sharing a video on Twitter seems to work better on an iPhone, and sharing a tweet on Instagram stories. Again, it just works on the iPhone. On the Pixel 7 Pro, the actual tweet drops low on the story page, and then you have to manually, if you want it to be all things symmetrical in the middle, I have to actually move it. Just an extra step. Really little things, but they do build up if you use them a lot. So certain apps do seem to be slightly better optimized, and that's probably mainly down to how locked down the Apple software system is. But sometimes the sheer nature of that is also its con. The fact Android is much more open, it can be far more customizable to you and your tastes. Apple make the phone how they want you to use it, and you can't really stray from that. Android is much more flexible. There are many third-party apps, for example, that aren't available on the respective app stores. On Android, it's far more easier to download and use them. Apple, you have to get into things like jailbreaking, and that's the Apple Watch Ultra notification. The settings menu also seems better organised, more concise on the Pixel 7 Pro. Many options that you see in the iPhone settings tab just seem... there's too many of them. It's all very clustered. It's all kind of a bit all over the place. There doesn't seem to be much order there, and I think they could be grouped much better. Like for a start, putting all of the apps into an app folder instead of having all of the apps in a massive long line just randomly on your settings page. They could be hidden away in the settings like on Android, and the way Android hides non-essential home screen apps away in the app drawer, in my opinion, is better as well. It's one swipe up from the bottom, and while Apple have introduced an app library, it's basically the same thing, depending on how many apps you've got on your homepage, that might be 2, 3, 4 swipes away. And again, it's just added steps that you simply don't need. So extra work, just like with the notifications swipe away. Again, on Android, 1 swipe, done. On the iPhone, it's either 2 swipes or a long, purposeful swipe, which again is just a bit more effort. Again, little things, but it is different. We're all very lazy these days. The little things matter. Oh, and don't get me started on Apple's refusal to allow you to customize how your apps are grouped together on your homepage. The fact that you cannot space between them and you cannot customize from bottom to top in a world of big phone screens is, I wouldn't say horrific, but I just don't get it. You should be at least able to choose for yourself whether you want to organize them from bottom to top or top to bottom, so that if you wanted to just have the apps on your home screen at the bottom within reach, if you've got little hands or you just want to use one hand easier, you should be able to just have three rows, for example, 2 rows at the bottom and nothing at the top. It just seems a bit counterproductive, especially considering they've gone to great lengths to change the notifications so that you can now access them and interact with them at the bottom of the screen. So they know that sort of thing is more helpful, so I don't know why you can't do it. And I've got similar mixed thoughts on Apple's new dynamic island and new lock screen. The customization of wallpapers and widgets on Apple's lock screen and always on display is great, although it is a bit of a battery drainer compared to the Pixel's more simplified version. More simplified? That's not a word. Simplified, I think, is the term we were looking for. And more on battery later. And I also really like the idea of the dynamic island. And in some use cases, it is very intuitive. Although you do have to reach up high in order to interact with it. And there's no denying that when viewing content, gaming, etc. on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, it's in the way. And I haven't really got used to it as much as I had done the notch, because it cuts even further in and is much more noticeable. The Pixel 7 Pro from an aesthetics point of view is just better in this department. The single camera punch-hole cutout is just far less intrusive. Now, if you are going to be gaming, the iPhone 14 Pro Max with its A16 Bionic chip is going to perform better than the Pixel 7 Pro and its Tensor G2, as it will if you decide to use your phone for something like video editing or anything else that's heavily graphic based. By no means does that mean you can't game on the Pixel 7 Pro, and you can do really well. We're just talking which is better, and objectively, the 14 Pro Max is more powerful. Outside of that, both phones are capable of pretty much anything you would want to do on a smartphone in 2022. Now, both those chipsets and the phone's software are two leading contributors to the phone's camera performances. But before we get to that, very quickly, for a limited time only, I have a special 20% off discount code from today's video sponsor, Rhino Shield. Rhino Shield, as the name suggests, offer cases that not only make a style impact, but also can protect your phone from impacts. The double whammy. Use the code ASBYT on checkout for a discount on a new smartphone case, whether that be a new iPhone or a new Pixel phone, with other devices also available. Not only do you have 360-degree protection with the Rhino Shield phone case and screen protector, which exceeds military standard drop protection, but the MagSafe magnetic pull force is twice the strength of the official Apple MagSafe products. Tons of styles, colours, and thousands of print designs and personalised services, and they also have some wicked collaboration designs like these NBA and NASA ones. And there are also Apple Watch and AirPods cases available. Check the link in the video description below if you're interested, and make sure you grab that discount with the code ASBYT at checkout. So, camera. HDR, while pretty great on both, is slightly better on the primary sensor and ultra-wide on the Pixel. Bright spots aren't usually too overexposed on either, but details in the shadows do tend to come up slightly better on the Pixel 7 Pro. I also tend to find iPhone images can display a fair amount of lens flare when the sun or a light source is in the background of the shot, something that the Pixel 7 Pro can experience in night shots with a weird, funky colour to them, with the 14 Pro Max being perhaps more natural and more true to life. In certain situations, portrait shots are objectively better on the Pixel in terms of edge detection, the separation between the focal point and the blurred background. And this is mainly for two main reasons. Number one, you can use the same mode across the board, no matter what the subject matter is on the Pixel phone. On the iPhone, it kind of tends to have to be a person, otherwise the edge detection isn't that great. And number two, you can also shoot using portrait mode on the Pixel any distance from the subject, whereas on the iPhone it'll say things like move further away in order to activate it, so it can be a bit more finicky. So with moving subjects, pets, children, family members, etc., the Pixel phone can tend to be easier getting portrait shots in that circumstance. And the shutter speed still tends to be quicker on the Google phone as well, with a lot of the final image details being created in its incredibly powerful post-processing system. So this inevitably will lead to more reliable portrait shots, although if you're using the 2x shot in portrait, I have noticed it does appear very over-processed and just a bit grim at times. The iPhone, again, has a slightly more natural nature to it. The iPhone 14 Pro Max, while it has improved from previous iPhones in terms of that moving subject portrait shot, it is still definitely less reliable, which means that you will get a fair amount of blurred shots if you're trying to use portrait mode on an iPhone on an iPhone 14 Pro Max. But objectively, the camera app on the iPhone works better. It's just more reliable. Almost 100% of the time you try and take a photo, it takes the shot, snaps. Very responsive, just works. Whereas on the Pixel 7 Pro, if you're taking a good few shots at fairly quick succession, you will get freezes and glitches and stop-outs, and this has not really been improved as yet with any of the software updates I've experienced. Sometimes iPhone shots can appear slightly over-sharpened and unnatural looking when you are using the zoom, and there's no denying with its 5x optical zoom, the Google Pixel 7 Pro is much better at producing sharper, more detailed images when you have a subject that is quite a long distance away, because the iPhone has only 3x optical zoom. But when close, until that 5x optical zoom is activated, the digital zoom on the Pixel will actually produce not as good shots as on the close-up zoom shots on the iPhone. If it's like a 3x zoom between the two, for example, the iPhone will give you a sharper, more detailed image. So again, this is subjective depending on how you generally use zoom. If you do zoom but only little amounts, you'll probably get better performance on the iPhone. If you do a lot of zoom shots where you're going a long way into the distance, you'll get better shots on the Pixel. And the camera rig has definitely stood the test of time better on the 14 Pro Max, with the 7 Pro's camera strip across the back completely scratched to high heaven. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration, it's not horrific, but the build quality definitely doesn't feel quite as robust as on the iPhone. And the iPhone is still the benchmark king when it comes to video. Google have done some brilliant work in recent generations with their video upgrades, but the 14 Pro Max just seems to have that ultra clean, more natural, less processed, low noise footage compared. And the fact you have 4K across the board with all lenses and I think all modes, it's just an ideal all-round video camera. Although I would argue that color temperature on an iPhone's camera is still a bit off by default. I've said it for many generations and I will continue to say it with the 14 series. They're just too warm. Now, one new feature you can utilize on the iPhone, the press and hold to copy and paste or single out a specific thing within an image and use elsewhere, is an absolute joy to use. I must say, when creating thumbnails, for example, this has been an absolute game changer for me. It's reduced the time I've had to use on programs like Photoshop, GIMP, etc. And this is something I'm sure you can use as well in whatever walk of life you choose to use. If it's just sharing things with friends over message, is really useful. Now, if you're into photo or video editing or just a working environment as a whole, the idea of the communication between devices becomes quite a key decision factor here. And the idea of compatibility and integration is where Apple really kills it. And it's possibly one of the iPhone's biggest strengths. I know for a fact the iPhone's ability to communicate seamlessly with iPads, MacBooks, AirPods, Apple Watches, the ecosystem as a whole is a big driver in leading people to buy iPhones and keeps them buying iPhones year on year. There still simply isn't anything else on the Android side which can quite compete. If you want a tech ecosystem, Apple still produces the best. Apple's, whilst not cheap, their product range is so competitive now. Whether we're talking phones, iPhones, tablets, iPads, computers, MacBooks, etc., headphones, the lot. They do everything, and they do everything to objectively a very, very high standard now. Yes, they might not be everyone's cup of tea, but you can't deny that on the whole, when you then take into account things like streaming services, music, etc., there aren't many companies that produce such an array of products. Certainly on the Android side, Samsung aside possibly. So one thing I have always found odd is the walled garden that people often refer to Apple's ecosystem as. They often see it as a problem, but really, surely that's a major strength. Their products all work incredibly well together, so if you like using them, What's wrong with that? Surely that's the ideal, to have all of your tech products communicating with each other seamlessly. That's the goal, right? File sharing, phone calls, messaging. It's just great if all of your products can do it well together. And while with Google you do have some great hardware, some great software, a lot of smart tech products, still don't have a major laptop or computer. The messaging service isn't quite as accomplished in my opinion. And as good as I mentioned, the Google cameras and smart home tech, etc. is, you can do all of that on the iPhone as well. They have apps for it. So yeah. The only part of the seamless Apple experience that doesn't ring true is that darn Lightning port. Grrr. You use Type-C for MacBooks, Type-C for iPads, Lightning for iPhones and AirPods. That makes zero sense to me. You should be able to use the same cable right the way through like you can on literally everything else nowadays. And it's beyond stubborn at this point. It makes zero sense to me. There's maximising profits and then there's shortchanging customers, and I think that comes under the latter, unfortunately. Now, charging speeds on the iPhone 14 Pro Max are slower than a whole host of Android phones, but interestingly, the Pixel 7 Pro isn't one of them. They're much of a muchness. Both could do a lot more in that department, and both are very similar with battery drain as well. The slightly smaller capacity on the 14 Pro Max is countered by the very good optimization, and this means the two phones go toe-to-toe with, at a push, I would say, in my experience, the iPhone slightly outdoing the Pixel 7 Pro, but it's very, very close. And the iPhone 14 Pro Max does have better speaker performance, in my opinion. Again, let me know in the comments what you think. And that's the general consensus here. There are a lot of pros and cons to both, and a lot of them can be quite subjective. And definitely there is no right or wrong answer here. There is no one phone fits all, and one is definitely better for everybody. But for the individual, and for some of those circumstances we have discussed, there definitely is a right answer. And you just have to work out what individual you are. Luckily for me, I get to use both, and outside of the folding phones, which are another category altogether, I would say in traditional phone format, these are probably the two that I would personally choose right now. The best from Apple, and the best from Google and Android. But as you know, tech doesn't sleep, and that answer could be completely different tomorrow when I unbox something else. Make sure you're subscribed so that when that happens, you are in the know. And if you haven't subscribed already, how very dare you? You've got this far and you're not even subscribed. That is shocking. Shame on you. Yeah, that's what I thought. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. My name's Adam. You've been the best as always. I love you and leave you. I'll see you in the next one. ASBYT. Peace out.